King Harris preached to the whole world that he was standing on business. Every time he spoke, every time he went live, he made sure people knew he wasn't to be messed with. But the second those prison doors slammed shut, the truth came out. The fearless image, the loud words, the confidence, it all shattered in seconds. What happened behind those walls has left the streets talking, and y'all, the tea is hot. The so-called Prince of Trap found himself facing something no money, no fame, and no famous last name could protect him from: reality. According to a gang leader from Atlanta who came forward recently, King's time behind bars didn't go how he thought it would. The same kid who used to puff out his chest on Instagram and shout, "I stand on business," was now sitting in a cell, scared, confused, and begging for a way out. This wasn't the life he thought it was, and deep down, it's clear he messed with the wrong people. The story begins with that one moment that changed everything. A simple traffic stop that spiraled into chaos. King was driving his BMW, probably feeling untouchable, when police pulled him over for an illegal turn. What looked like a regular stop turned into a nightmare in seconds. The officers found a warrant, weapons, and a smell of weed that filled the car. Suddenly, the son of Atlanta royalty was on the ground, cuffs tight around his wrists, hearing those cold words, "You're being detained." For someone who grew up in a mansion, that moment must have been a shock. The lights, the sirens, the shouts, this wasn't a music video. It was real life. And when those cuffs clicked, the fantasy cracked. King kept his cool on the outside. The cops even said he seemed calm. But deep down, you could already see the fear creeping in. Because being calm with the police is one thing. Facing real gang politics inside jail is another story entirely. Inside those walls, everything King thought he knew about toughness went out the window. The gang leader's story ripped through social media like wildfire. He said King wasn't who he claimed to be. That when things got real, the boy who had been shouting, "Stand on business," froze like a deer in headlights. The same people who once hyped him up were now laughing behind his back. But before we dive into that humiliation, let's talk about why King was even in this position in the first place. Why did a kid born into privilege, son of a legend like T.I., feel the need to chase the street life so hard? Even people like DJ Academics said they didn't understand it. Why is King so obsessed with the streets, he asked. Street dudes ain't winning. And he was right. King grew up with everything: money, fame, family connections. But he wanted the one thing he couldn't buy: respect from the streets.
It's like he wanted to prove he was built like that he wasn't just some spoiled kid living off his daddy's legacy. So he went on Instagram Live, shouting at his dad, throwing tantrums, trying to act tough. Remember that viral clip? King screaming, "Why you letting somebody play with me like that?" His voice cracking, his body shaking with anger. But people didn't see a tough guy. They saw a boy trying too hard to be something he wasn't. Even his parents knew it. Tiny, his mother, said it straight up. "King ain't got good sense." She joked in an interview, but y'all, behind that joke was truth. And T.I., he was tired. He told King right there on Live, "You wanted to go over there. You cried and cried when you couldn't. You got a big house, big yard, everything you could want, but you want to be from the ghetto so bad." That right there showed the whole world what was going on. King wasn't from the trenches, he was chasing them. And that's the cruel part. Real street dudes can smell fake energy a mile away. They know who's lived it and who's acting it out. So when King walked into that jail with his designer shoes and family name, people already had their eyes on him. The whispers started before he even reached his cell. "That's T.I.'s son. He thinks he's tough." And according to the gang leader, that's when the testing began. They didn't wait long. It started small. A shove in the hallway, someone getting in his face saying, "You standing on business, right? Let's see it." But instead of standing tall, instead of backing his words with action, he froze. The gang leader said it clear. King tried to talk his way out. He started dropping names, saying who his daddy was, trying to smooth things over. But that was the worst thing he could have done. In jail, you don't name drop. You don't talk your way into respect. You earn it. No, you don't get it at all. And once people saw that fear in his eyes, it was over. By dinner time, the story had spread through the block. T.I.'s son froze up. Prince of Trap ain't built for this. Inmates were mocking him, imitating his voice, repeating his own words back at him. You know I stand on business, and laughing. It became a joke. The image King spent years building online collapsed in a single day. Now outside those walls, the internet was eating it up. Blogs picked it up, memes started flying, and clips of King arguing with his dad were plastered all over TikTok with captions like, "Business closed early." The same people who once hyped him were now tearing him down. And it didn't stop there. His own family got dragged into it. People were saying, even his mama said he ain't got sense, while others called T.I. a hypocrite for preaching about responsibility when his own son couldn't handle jail for a day.
And y'all, that humiliation wasn't just about words. It was dangerous. Because once inmates know you're scared, you become a target. Maybe not for violence right away, but for manipulation. They start seeing what they can take from you. Your food, your commissary, your pride. And King, being who he is, probably had more to lose than anyone. The rich kid with a famous daddy? That's bait. The gang leader didn't stop at saying King was scared. He described how King looked nervous, trying to act cool but trembling. And that image stuck, because in the streets, perception is everything. Once people see you as weak, that's it. It's like blood in the water. And what makes this whole thing so tragic is that it didn't have to be this way. King had every opportunity to live a good life. His father fought hard to give him that. T.I. came from the trenches for real. He knew what that life could do to you. But instead of learning from his father's mistakes, King wanted to relive them. He wanted the struggle, the danger, the respect that comes with surviving the hood. But he didn't understand that surviving it is not the same as wanting it. When Tiny said he ain't got good sense, it wasn't just a joke. It was a mother seeing her child headed down the wrong road and feeling powerless to stop it. And when T.I. told him he was acting out, that was a father watching his own legacy crumble in real time. Imagine being T.I., a man who worked his way from hustling on the streets to becoming a Grammy-winning rapper and community leader, only to see his son chasing the very demons he escaped. The gang leader's words hit T.I. harder than anyone, because it wasn't just a random rumor. It was confirmation that all the warnings, all the lectures, all the love had fallen on deaf ears. The man who once called himself the King of the South now had to watch his son get called out as the clown of the cell block. Now, that's pain money can't fix. But for King, it's even worse. Once your reputation gets destroyed like that, it follows you forever. Even if he gets released tomorrow, the streets won't forget. They'll say, that's the kid who folded. And every time he goes live, every time he posts a song or tries to act tough again, people will bring it up. His own words, "I stand on business," have become a curse. Now let's talk about why that gang leader exposed him in the first place. People were shocked. They said, why would he snitch on King? Why would he break the code? But that's not how it works in jail. That man wasn't snitching, he was flexing his power. By exposing King, he proved he had control. He showed the streets that fame doesn't buy respect, and that even T.I.'s son can be humbled. That's credibility in their world. And when that story hit social media, the damage was irreversible. Memes flooded every corner of the internet. People posted clips of King yelling at his father side by side with fake captions like, "Still standing on business?" with laughing emojis. Some even edited his voice over scenes from jail shows, turning his humiliation into entertainment. It was cruel, but it showed how quickly fame turns into mockery. King's fall became a lesson not just for him, but for every kid out there chasing an image that doesn't belong to them. The internet glamorizes the streets, but real life doesn't work that way. You can't fake fearlessness, you can't buy toughness, and you can't walk into a system built on survival and expect your last name to protect you. What's wild is that even people who used to clown King are not worried about him. Because humiliation in prison isn't just embarrassing, it's dangerous. Once you're seen as weak, you can't move the same way. You gotta watch your back 24/7. Every word, every glance, every laugh could turn into a setup. And T.I. knows this. Behind all the public silence, you can bet he's worried sick. No matter how famous he is, no father wants to see his son break down like that. The man who once lectured young rappers about avoiding street life is now living the nightmare of seeing his own child drown in it. And Tiny, she's probably torn apart watching the internet tear into her baby. King's entire identity was built on trying to prove something he never needed to prove. He had everything people fight for: security, opportunity, and love. But he traded all that for an illusion. He wanted to be feared when he should have been grateful. He wanted to be real when he already had it better than real. And now, after being exposed, King faces a hard truth. Once the streets decide you're not built for it, that label sticks forever. Even if he tries to redeem himself, people will question his motives. If he goes quiet, they'll say he's hiding. If he acts tough again, they'll say he's faking. There's no winning once the illusion collapses. But maybe, just maybe, it could be a turning point. Maybe this humiliation, this breakdown could wake him up. Because everyone loves a redemption story. If King takes this as a lesson, admits his mistakes, and stops pretending, he might just find peace. But knowing how proud he is, that's easier said than done.
The truth is, King Harris's story isn't just about one kid messing up. It's a reflection of a bigger problem, a culture where young men chase pain for validation, where privilege gets traded for struggle just to feel respected, where the sons of legends try to recreate their father's struggles instead of learning from them. T.I. escaped the streets so his son wouldn't have to, but King ran straight toward them. And when he got there, he realized the streets don't care who your father is. They don't care how many followers you have or how tough you act online. When the lights go out and the bars close, it's just you and your choices. And right now, King's choices have caught up with him. The world has seen the truth, the tough talk, the pride, the standing on business. It's all been stripped away. What's left is a young man scared, embarrassed, and learning the hardest lesson of his life, that the streets don't play. So where does he go from here? Maybe he'll humble himself. Maybe he'll come out of this realizing that there's nothing wrong with being privileged, nothing weak about choosing peace over pain. But if he keeps chasing that validation, if he keeps trying to prove he's tough, the same cycle will repeat. Because y'all, when the business stood on him, the illusion fell apart. King Harris learned the hard way that the streets are undefeated. Fame can't save you, money can't buy you safety, and no last name can erase fear. He wanted to stand on business, but in the end, business stood on him. King Harris sat in that cold gray cell, his head down and his voice barely a whisper. The same boy who once strutted through life like royalty, flashing jewelry and confidence, now looked broken. Jail had stripped away the cameras, the designer clothes, the fame. All that was left was a scared young man who realized too late that he wasn't built for the world he tried to imitate. At first, King thought he could handle it. When he got locked up, he carried that same bravado he had online, talking loud, moving bold, trying to prove he wasn't just T.I. and Tiny's son, but a man who could stand on his own. But the jail walls don't care about fame. Inside, no one cared who his daddy was. Respect had to be earned, and King quickly learned that some people in there had nothing to lose. He started noticing the way certain inmates looked at him, not with fear, but with hunger. To them, King was a walking target. A celebrity son in jail meant power, clout, and leverage. All it took was one wrong word, one wrong move, and everything could spiral. At first, the tension was silent. The gang members in his block watched him like hawks, whispering every time he passed. Then one night, it got real. King got into a fight, not one of those little scuffles, but a full-blown ambush. Reports said it started over something small, a disrespectful comment about food. But deep down,
everyone knew it was more than that. King had been trying too hard to prove himself, and in jail, trying too hard is the quickest way to get hurt. When guards finally pulled him out, his face was bruised and his pride shattered. Word spread fast. King Harris had messed with the wrong gang, and they weren't done. That's when fear started to sink in. The same boy who used to brag online about being built for this now realized he was way out of his depth.
From that night on, King barely slept. Every sound made him jump. He started keeping to himself, stopped talking loud, and stopped making eye contact. Other inmates said you could see the change. His whole aura shifted. He wasn't the tough-talking kid anymore. He was just trying to survive. Days turned into weeks, and that fear started eating him alive. Then came the court date. King walked into that courtroom with shackles on his ankles and tears threatening to fall. He wasn't cocky, he wasn't grinning, he was humbled. As the judge looked over his file, King's lawyer whispered that he'd get a chance to speak. And when he did, the entire courtroom fell silent. King's voice trembled as he said, "Your Honor, I made a mistake. I thought I knew what real life was, but I didn't. I thought I could handle anything, but I can't. I just want to go home." He paused, trying to hold it together. "I know I messed up, but I learned. I ain't built for that life. Please, just give me another chance." T.I. sat in the back row, his face heavy with guilt and worry. The pain in his eyes told a story of a father watching his son walk through fire he once tried to warn him about. Tiny had tears rolling down her cheeks, whispering prayers under her breath. This wasn't the king they raised. This was a boy who got lost chasing an image the world sold him. The judge listened carefully, but the room stayed tense. King's plea wasn't just for freedom. It was a cry for mercy. His experience behind bars had changed him, and everyone could see it. He wasn't asking to escape consequences. He was begging for a lifeline. Rumors started spreading online right after the hearing that King had broken down completely, even collapsing before being escorted out. Some said he couldn't stop crying. Others said he whispered, "I'll never go back." Whatever happened that day, it shook him to the core. And that's when the public started to shift. People who once laughed at his tough guy persona started showing sympathy. They saw a young man who finally realized that the streets don't play fair. Fame couldn't protect him, family couldn't save him, and money couldn't buy peace behind bars. Inside the jail, word spread that King had been moved to a different section for safety reasons. Some said the guard he clashed with had plans to retaliate. Others said the guards just didn't want another incident. Either way, King knew he was walking on thin ice. Every night, he prayed, not for fame, not for money, just for another sunrise outside those walls. T.I., meanwhile, was doing everything he could behind the scenes. He called in lawyers, spoke with officials, and used every resource he had to protect his son. But deep down, he knew this was bigger than legal battles. It was about King finding his way back to himself. In one emotional phone call that leaked online, you could hear King's voice crack as he told his father, "Dad, I get it now. I don't want this life no more. I just want to come home." That clip broke the internet. People who once mocked him were now praying for him. They realized King wasn't just a spoiled celebrity kid. He was a young man trapped in a reality he couldn't escape. The next court hearing was scheduled to review his request for early release. King walked in quietly, hands clasped, eyes down. His lawyer spoke about rehabilitation, growth, and the dangers he'd faced inside. The judge listened, weighing every word. And then, after what felt like an eternity, the judge spoke. "Mr. Harris, I can see you've been humbled by your experience, but redemption doesn't come easy.
I'm granting your request for supervised release under strict conditions." The courtroom gasped. T.I. stood up, his eyes wet with relief. Tiny broke down in tears. King's lips trembled as he nodded, whispering a quiet thank you. He wasn't free just yet. He still had a long road ahead. But for the first time in months, there was hope.
When King walked out that day, he didn't smile for the cameras. He didn't say a word to the press. He just held his parents tight, eyes full of emotion. He'd been through hell, and he came out changed. Everyone could see it. The boy who once bragged about being real finally understood what real meant. It wasn't about fighting or flashing money. It was about surviving, learning, and facing your truth. As the story spread online, fans flooded social media with messages of love and hope. Some said, "This is the wake-up call he needed." Others said, "God gave him another chance." But everyone agreed on one thing: King Harris would never be the same again. When King Harris finally stepped out of that cold, echoing jail, the world outside felt unreal. The cameras flashed, the reporters shouted questions, and the air was thick with chaos. His mother, Teeny, was there waiting, tears in her eyes, arms wide open. But even her warmth couldn't erase the weight King was carrying. That experience had changed him in ways nobody could see from the outside. The boy who used to walk around with swagger and confidence now had a different look in his eyes. Gone was the careless grin and the wild temper, replaced by something harder, something haunted. The rumors about the gang he crossed inside weren't exaggerated. King had learned the hard way that fame didn't protect you behind those bars. Respect had to be earned differently in there, and he'd come dangerously close to losing everything. As soon as King got home, social media lit up. Some fans were cheering, saying "Free King" and celebrating his release. Others were colder, mocking his fear and saying the jail time had humbled him real quick. Even some of his old friends started keeping their distance. The whole world had seen the footage of him crying out for the judge to let him go. The tough image he'd built online was shattered overnight. T.I. tried to protect him from the backlash, telling the press that his son had been through a real test and that the family was focused on healing. But behind closed doors, T.I. was furious. Not at King, but at the system, at the people who had dragged his son into this mess, and even at himself for letting it get that far. He kept asking, "Where did I go wrong?" Teeny, meanwhile, became King's anchor. She stayed by his side constantly, making sure he ate, prayed, and talked through what happened. She said to him softly one night, "You don't gotta prove nothing to nobody, baby. The world gon' talk either way. Just stay alive and stay smart." King nodded, but deep down he was still restless. He didn't sleep much those first few weeks. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw faces from the jail, some angry, some broken, some unforgettable. He couldn't stop hearing the noise, the fights, the whispers. And then there was that gang, the one he shouldn't have messed with. People whispered that they were still watching, still waiting for the right time. That paranoia stuck with him like a shadow. T.I. ramped up security at the house, keeping guards posted 24/7. Even when King wanted to go out, his father made sure someone followed. King hated it at first, saying, "I can take care of myself." But deep down, he knew he'd crossed a line that wasn't easy to walk back from. The streets had long memories. Despite everything, King wanted to make things right. He started speaking quietly to some youth programs, talking to kids who thought fame or street life would protect them. His tone wasn't cocky anymore. It was honest. He said, "You think you hard till you realize ain't nobody coming to save you in that cell." The words hit home for a lot of young fans who once looked up to his tough image. But not everyone believed the change. Online blogs speculated that King was just trying to clean his image. Some even claimed the wrong gang had put a price on his head, forcing his family to step in behind the scenes. Nobody could confirm it, but the whispers grew louder every day. Then one night, paparazzi caught King at a studio session, surrounded by bodyguards. The footage went viral. He looked different, quieter,
sharper, focused. Gone were the flashy clothes and wild antics. In their place was a young man who had seen too much too soon. He was working on music again, but this time his lyrics were deeper, darker. He rapped about betrayal, fear, and learning the truth about loyalty. Fans said it was the most real he had ever sounded. T.I. couldn't hide his pride when he heard the new material. He posted a short message online. Sometimes the pain make the man. That post alone got millions of likes. For the first time, people weren't laughing at King. They were listening. Still, danger lingered. A few weeks later, word spread that one of the men King had problems with inside was found dead. Police called it unrelated, but the internet had other ideas. Some said it was revenge. Others claimed it was a warning. King stayed quiet, refusing to feed into rumors. He had promised himself and his family that he'd stay out of trouble.
But peace doesn't come easy when your name is King Harris. The more he tried to move on, the more people tried to pull him back into the chaos. Old enemies resurfaced, online trolls mocked his transformation, and even some rappers threw subliminal shots in their songs. But this time, King didn't react. He stayed silent, letting his actions speak. One night, during a rare live stream, King looked straight into the camera and said, "I ain't the same person that walked into that jail. Y'all can clown, but y'all ain't seen what I seen. You don't come out of that and stay the same." His voice cracked a little, but his message was clear. The boy was gone. The man had arrived. T.I. later revealed in an interview that King was going to therapy, working on music, and staying focused on rebuilding his life. He said, "Sometimes the streets gotta break you down before you realize your worth, but I thank God my son's still here to learn from it." Still, the fear of the wrong gang never fully faded. Security stayed tight. Every car that passed by the house, every strange call, every unfamiliar face, it all put the family on edge. Tiny often prayed over his son before bed, whispering, "You covered, baby, you covered." Months later, King released a song titled "Four Walls," where he talked about being trapped, not just in jail, but in his own pride. The lyrics were raw. "Thought I was a king, but I was living blind. Now I'm praying for peace, not another headline." The track blew up instantly. Critics called it King's redemption arc. Fans said it was his best work yet. It wasn't about fame anymore. It was about truth. Even Charleston White, who once mocked him, posted online saying, "That young man finally learning. Maybe this time he gonna live right." And for once, the internet agreed. King Harris's release wasn't just freedom, it was rebirth. But deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. The gang he crossed might have faded from the headlines, but in his mind, they were still there, watching, waiting. And as much as King tried to leave that world behind, he also knew some things, once you touch them, never let go. After the chaos settled and the headlines began to fade, King Harris found himself standing at a crossroads. Freedom felt heavy. He wasn't just walking out of jail, he was walking into a new version of himself. Everywhere he went, people looked at him differently. Some saw the same loud, reckless kid who used to taunt police on Instagram. Others saw a young man who'd been broken down and forced to face his own truth. King felt both. He carried the weight of his mistakes like chains that weren't visible, but impossible to shake. The first few months after his release were quiet. He barely went out, choosing instead to stay inside his father's Atlanta mansion. T.I. kept him close, not out of control, but protection. He knew how easily the streets could swallow a boy who thought he was grown. The threats from that gang still lingered in the background. Whispers, rumors, social media comments from fake accounts that felt a little too specific. Security stayed tight, but King knew fear wasn't something you could lock out. It lived in your chest. Still, he refused to go back to that dark place. He wanted redemption, not sympathy. One morning, after another restless night, he walked into his dad's studio and said, "I'm done hiding. I want to make this mean something." T.I. looked at him for a long moment and simply nodded. He knew what his son was saying without him having to explain.
It was time for King to rebuild, not for the cameras, but for himself. The first step was music, but this time it wasn't about showing off. The lyrics cut deep, about fear, regret, betrayal, and the pressure of growing up under famous parents. His voice was raw, trembling at times, but it was real. He talked about the night he broke down in court, how he begged the judge to let him go, and how shame followed him even after he was free. In one verse, he said, "You can't act tough when the lights go off. Them walls don't care about who you are. I prayed for mercy in the dark. Now I'm learning peace don't come from scars." When the track dropped, people were stunned. It wasn't the same King who once picked fights for clout. This was a young man talking from experience, pain, and truth. The track climbed charts slowly but organically. For the first time, he was being respected, not as T.I.'s son, but as an artist, finding his own voice. Meanwhile, the emotional work was harder. Therapy became part of his routine. He'd sit with a counselor twice a week, unpacking the trauma he'd never talked about, the pressure of fame, the fear of being weak, the humiliation of being mocked by millions. Tiny often sat with him afterwards, just holding him when words weren't enough. She told him, "You can't heal if you keep hating yourself." But King struggled. Some nights, he'd scroll through social media and see old clips of himself in that courtroom, his face twisted in fear, the internet laughing. It burned. He wanted to erase it all, to scream at people who didn't know what it was like to feel death breathing down your neck. Yet every time the anger came, he remembered what jail taught him. Silence can be strength. Still, the shadows followed him. Every few weeks, there'd be a message, a warning, something vague but chilling, suggesting that the gang he crossed hadn't forgotten. It was like living with a ghost. Security handled what they could, but paranoia became part of his daily life. Even stepping outside felt like a risk. One wrong move, one wrong face, and everything could collapse again. But instead of running from it, he started facing it through his art. He wrote more music, filmed documentaries, and began quietly funding programs for young men who'd been locked up. He didn't want to preach, he wanted to help. He'd show up to community centers unannounced, sit with teens who reminded him of himself, and tell him what nobody told him. "You ain't soft for wanting better," he'd say. "You smart for staying alive."
Those moments changed him. The same people who once laughed at his pain started seeing growth. The streets that once mocked him now saw him as someone trying to give back. Even the bloggers began shifting the narrative, calling him a work in progress instead of a lost cause. T.I. and Tiny couldn't hide their pride. They saw their son evolving, turning his pain into purpose. T.I. said in an interview, he had to hit rock bottom to see what really matters. You can't protect your kids from every storm, but you can teach them how to stand when it hits. Still, King knew forgiveness had to come from within. One evening, he went back to the church his grandmother used to take him to as a kid. The lights were dim, the pews empty, and the silence heavy. He sat there for hours, replaying every mistake, every lie, every time he acted like he was untouchable. Then, with tears in his eyes, he whispered, "I forgive me." It wasn't dramatic, no lightning, no music, just peace. A small, fragile kind of peace he hadn't felt in years. From that moment, something in him shifted. The fear was still there, but it didn't control him anymore. He understood now that redemption wasn't about proving people wrong. It was about proving to himself that he could rise again. Months later, he released an album titled Second Chance. It was raw, emotional, and brutally honest. Each track told a piece of his story, from arrogance to collapse to redemption. Critics called it his confession album. Fans called it the realest thing he's ever done. And when he performed it live for the first time, standing under those bright lights, he broke down halfway through his set. The crowd didn't laugh. They cried with him. By then, the threats had died down. The gang that once haunted him seemed to move on. Or maybe they saw he wasn't the same boy they wanted to punish. Either way, King was finally breathing again. He was working, healing, growing, and though the past could never be erased, it no longer defined him. In one of his final interviews that year,
A reporter asked him, "If you could tell your younger self one thing, what would it be?" King smiled faintly and said, "You don't gotta act tough to be real. Real is surviving your own mistakes and still having love in your heart." And that was it. The boy who begged the judge for freedom had found something greater than release. He found redemption. He found peace. He found himself. As time passed, King Harris began to feel a lightness he hadn't known in years. The nightmares came less often, and the weight that once pressed down on his chest every morning began to lift. Life was still complicated. Fame, rumors, and expectations never fully disappeared, but something inside him had shifted. He wasn't running from his past anymore. He was learning to walk with it. It started at home. For so long, tension had filled the Harris household. Unspoken words between father and son, long silences at dinner, moments where love got buried under pride. T.I. had always been the strong one, the man who had faced his own demons and survived. But watching King fall apart in public had cracked something in him too. He'd been angry, hurt, and scared, but more than anything, he'd been desperate to see his son live differently. One night, after weeks of avoiding the conversation, King walked into his father's office. T.I. was sitting at his desk, headphones on, working on a verse. King waited quietly until his dad looked up. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then King said, "I know I put y'all through hell." T.I. leaned back, eyes soft but heavy. "You did. But hell ain't permanent if you walk out of it." King nodded, tears pooling in his eyes. "I thought I had to be like everybody else. Act tough, act grown. I didn't know it was okay to just be scared."
T.I. stood up and put a hand on his son's shoulder. "You learned what I couldn't teach you, son. I walked my own path through that same fire. The only thing that matters now is you don't go back." That was the moment everything changed. The wall between them finally fell. For the first time in a long while, they hugged not as father and rebellious son, but as two men who had both seen the edge and come back stronger. Tiny joined them, tears streaming, whispering, "This all I ever prayed for." From that day, the energy in their home shifted. Meals were shared with laughter again, not tension. King started spending more time with his younger siblings, teaching them things about resilience and patience instead of rebellion and pride. He'd sit on the porch with his dad, talking about life, music, faith. Things that used to turn into arguments now became lessons. But one part of his healing still felt unfinished: his friends. Many of the people King had once surrounded himself with were gone, either distancing themselves during his downfall or still stuck in the same cycle he escaped. Some had betrayed him. Others were just lost. But deep down, King didn't want to hold grudges. He wanted closure. He reached out quietly to a few of them, one by one. The conversations were awkward at first, long pauses, apologies that didn't come easy. But King didn't approach it with anger. He just wanted peace. "We was young, wild, and stupid," he told one of his old friends over lunch. "But I ain't mad no more. I just want everybody to live." That forgiveness started a ripple. Some of his old crew started turning their lives around too, inspired by the way King had owned his mistakes. They post messages online saying, "Proud of my boy King. We all growing up out here." It was small, but it mattered. It showed that even in a world built on pride, growth was contagious. Then came his biggest step yet, using his story to help others publicly. His management team arranged a youth conference in Atlanta, focusing on second chances and self-worth. King was hesitant at first. He wasn't sure he could stand on a stage and relive his trauma in front of hundreds of people. But Tiny told him, "Your scars can heal somebody else's wounds." Those words stuck. When the day came, the auditorium was packed. Teenagers, parents, local activists, even other young artists who had been watching his journey. King stood backstage, his hands trembling slightly. Then, with a deep breath, he walked out to a standing ovation. He didn't use notes. He didn't read from a script. He just spoke from the heart. "I used to think being hard meant never backing down."
He began, his voice steady but emotional. But real strength is walking away before you lose yourself. It's looking in the mirror after you mess up and saying, I still got time to be better. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. Some were crying, others nodding, all feeling the truth in his voice. He talked about the fear he felt in that jail cell, how he begged the judge to let him go, and how he promised himself that if he ever got a second chance, he'd make it count. When he finished, he got a standing ovation. Not for fame, not for music, but for honesty. Afterward, dozens of teens came up to him, some hugging him, some crying, saying his words made them rethink their own choices. That moment hit him harder than any platinum plaque ever could. From that point on, King made it his mission to blend his art with his truth. He started a small foundation called the Second Chance Project, dedicated to helping young men who'd been incarcerated find work, therapy, and mentorship. He donated quietly, volunteered in person, and kept showing up when the cameras weren't around. It wasn't about image anymore, it was about impact. Months later, King sat on his back porch one evening, the sky glowing orange as the sun dipped low. His father sat beside him, sipping coffee, while Tiny hummed softly inside the house. King looked out at the yard where he used to play as a kid and said, "You know what's crazy, Pop? Jail saved my life." T.I. raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Sometimes God slow you down so you don't crash all the way." King smiled faintly. "I used to hate myself for breaking down in that courtroom, but now I see I had to break to rebuild right." T.I. reached over, gave his son a firm pat on the back, and said, "That's what being a man is about, King. Not being perfect, just being real enough to change." The night grew quiet. Crickets sang. The wind moved softly through the trees, and for the first time in years, King felt peace. Deep, honest peace. He had faced the darkness, walked through it, and come out carrying light. A few days later, he posted one simple message to his followers: "You can't outrun your mistakes, but you can outgrow them. I did. You can too." That post went viral, not because of drama, but because it was truth. The same internet that once mocked him now praised his growth. And this time, King didn't care about the likes or comments. He just hoped someone out there, feeling lost and trapped like he once did, would see that message and believe there was still a way out. From that moment, King Harris was no longer just T.I. and Tiny's son. He was a survivor, a messenger, and a reminder that redemption is never too far gone.